Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition is just on the horizon, and I think there are many people excited about finally getting some answers to the evil cliffhanger at the end of the previous game, and many people wondering how this might connect to the main trilogy, if at all. There's been a lot of hints set up over the years that some kind of major connections may be coming as far back as Xenoblade 2, but a lot of the lore reveals in Future Redeemed, and now some trailers we've seen of the epilogue story of X seem like it may be time to capitalize on that. My personal theory for how Xenoblade X connects to the numbered trilogy, and even to Xenosaga, is that I believe the world of Mira, and thus Xenoblade X, takes place inside a simulation, potentially powered by the Zohar/Conduit, or whatever you want to call it. Yes, really, a simulation. Now, considering the evidence and my confidence in this, I estimate there's maybe a 5% chance this is even remotely close to right, as I have no idea what Takahashi is thinking, and I expect to be thoroughly surprised when I actually play it. That said, I hope you will enjoy listening to my ramblings anyway. Also, here's your official spoiler warning. This video will have lore spoilers from the numbered trilogy of Xenoblade games, parts of Xenosaga, and even the ending of the original Xenoblade X. I will try to not talk about any major plot details aside from lore and potential connections, but you have been warned anyway. Please be careful. As per usual, if you're excited for Xenoblade X and want to see more content on the game leading up to release, and especially after the release of the game, I will be covering the game in great detail and making a lot of gameplay guides, so do be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hit 100,000 subscribers soon, and I would love you forever. Let's get into it. Now, first of all, I know what you're probably thinking. And now, I don't know if I like the idea of Xenoblade X taking place in a simulation because it feels like it might make everything feel meaningless if it isn't real. And in the past, I think I might have felt similar about something like this. However, I have experienced a couple stories recently where this was basically the case, and the characters inside the simulation were able to figure this out, and I think my opinion on this has changed entirely because of that. I think there's actually a lot of really interesting and cool things you can do with this. Just because the characters inside a simulation doesn't make the things happening any less real or meaningful for them, and I think in some ways showing that resolve that you can still create purpose and meaning even within a bleak situation like that can still be really cool. Secondly, in the context of Xeno as a whole, this wouldn't even be the first time a concept like this is used. Lest we forget some very important lore related to the Trinity processor, we know that Ontos, Logos, and Numa were all raised in virtual reality to gain a personality capable of controlling the conduit. Would you say any of these characters are less real because of that? There's also the Encephalon in Xenosaga, a virtual recreation of the world that in-game allows you to revisit past locations or even locations of the past as part of the story. The Encephalon ends up being very important throughout Xenosaga. Once again, it's essentially a virtual world or simulation of the world. The Encephalon is powered by the UMN, or Unus Mundus Network, a massive virtual network in Xenosaga that allows for hyperspace travel, lightspeed communication, and pretty much all forms of crazy advanced technology that allowed humanity to conquer the cosmos. And pretty much all of this originated when the Zohar was discovered. And, well, the logo for this network is an Ouroboros, which is pretty funny and probably doesn't mean anything, but it is still pretty funny. As it turns out, the infrastructure of this network is the collective unconscious of humanity, and if a similar system or even the same system is being used for a Mira simulation, a lot of pieces can potentially fall into place regarding things we've seen, as well as souls of people that exist within the collective unconscious that may have existed in the real world before being pulled into the simulation to experience life there in another incarnation. Point being, simulation and life within simulations are nothing new in the series, and the shenanigans with the Zohar/Conduit are the probable cause that led to these simulations. Now, before we move any further, I'd like to do a quick recap of the lore that we are aware of as far as potential connections are concerned. For the past 2 years, there has been a lot of discussion in particular about the end of Future Redeemed and what it might mean for the future of the series. In particular, there's been a lot of arguments about Xenosaga versus Xenoblade X and which one of these two were connected. And in particular, we were given some massive lore dumps all from a particular radio when we were seeing the past of the world or the Earth. This radio has the Vector logo engraved on it, and to put it simply, Vector is a company in Xenosaga, and they're basically the leading tech company in the universe at the time these games take place, and have been around an extremely long time. In fact, this company is actually the company that funded the Zohar expedition in Africa. If Xenosaga and Xenoblade take place in the same universe, this means this is also the same expedition that found the conduit, which has some interesting implications when you think about it. The radio goes on to name-drop Dmitry Yuriev, another important character in Xenosaga and part of the Salvatore faction. Interestingly enough, this would not be the only time Salvatore would be mentioned, as Nintendo of Europe would actually translate this as Saviorite in Xenoblade 2 when referring to the Saviorite rebels, and it seems like Yuriev is also involved with the Saviorites based on the radio in Future Redeemed. Considering Yuriev also has the ability to essentially body hop to preserve his life as part of his lore, and it's possible he may have been doing this for a very, very long time, there is probably a strong likelihood this is the same character, especially when combined with the radio specifically having the Vector logo on it, as it suggests Monolith went out of their way to give him permission from Namco for both of these, and Namco does indeed appear in the credits for the game. Now, it's possible that these are both just referential Easter eggs, but there's just a lot of really wild coincidences if that is truly the case. Furthermore, the post-credit scene of Future Redeemed seems to echo the post-credit scene of a certain other game in the franchise, of Cosmos floating towards the Earth after it recombines and seemingly reappears in the universe, which also aligns pretty much perfectly with the Earth disappearing in Xenosaga and being known as Lost Jerusalem, since everyone was unable to find it after a while, and that game ends with you wanting to basically continue that search for Lost Jerusalem and everyone trying to find it, and Cosmos floating towards that is just a nice indication that if they ever did continue with Xenosaga or have some kind of continuation of it, it would probably be far in the future and they would successfully have found Lost Jerusalem or Earth. It's possible the blue floating light towards the Earth in the post-credits of Future Redeemed isn't Cosmos, but there just seems to be far too many coincidences for it to just be something random and unimportant. When you also consider things like the conversation in Xenoblade 2 with all the main relevant characters, even if this isn't technically the real Cosmos, it does also seem like there's been ideas for something for a while. Even in the anniversary video as recently as last year, it had all of the relevant main characters including Cosmos in it, and maybe we're looking too deeply into it, but I think at some point it becomes more than just coincidences and Easter eggs. While the logo could be marked off as a cool Easter egg, I have a much harder time saying the same about a direct Dmitry Yuriev name drop. That's a highly specific reference for just an Easter egg. There's a lot of other potential lore-based connections like the similar origin of the Conduit/Zohar, among other things, that make Xenosaga and the numbered Xenoblade trilogy be potentially compatible. Not perfectly as of right now, but something that wouldn't need significant retcons. Now, the radio also mentions Project Exodus, an important plot point of Xenoblade X about humanity fleeing the Earth because of an intergalactic war, but you may be aware that I have always been against Xenoblade X taking place within the same universe as the numbered Xenoblade trilogy and Xenosaga. This is not to say I believed X was not canon, just that I did not think it would ever be possible for Xenoblade X to take place within the exact same universe because of the lore contradictions that were too massive. The Earth never being destroyed like we see it blowing up at X, no mention of an intergalactic war, humans being weak and having to flee instead of having the Zohar power that allows them to conquer the cosmos as seen in Xenosaga, the fact that aliens literally just don't exist in Xenosaga. There would be significant amounts of issues that would be difficult to rectify if that was truly the case. I'm not saying it's entirely impossible, but I think it would be extremely difficult. Even if the experiment happens at the same time as the Earth blowing up, there's just two completely different cutscenes happening there, and once again, there was no mention of an intergalactic war or aliens or anything like that. Maybe there could be some kind of memory manipulation thing happening at Mira, but the options are very few as for something that can make sense without very, very significant retcons. For this reason, I always believed this Project Exodus actually was just the referential thing, and it was referring to something different. Instead of humanity fleeing Earth, it was instead humanity triumphantly going out into the universe to find other planets and explore, similar to what happens in Xenosaga, and while there's no mention of it in the numbered Xenoblade trilogy, it seems like that is going to be the case here, since it is, of course, actually happening in the Xenoblade lore and Future Redeemed. Plus, with the X lore, most ships don't even make it out or have the celebratory news like we hear on the radio scene. For these reasons, I believe it is very difficult to rectify X being in the same universe. However, this does not mean I believe it is not canon or can't be canon to the numbered games. But for it to be canon, there has to be an alternate universe happening here, or an alternate dimension, or some kind of simulation within the universe at play here. And I currently believe the simulation theory to be the most valid, and it's something I've been thinking about for quite a while now. Feel free to come laugh at me if I'm entirely wrong after the game is out, by the way. The funniest timeline is even after all the new story content in X, there's still no obvious connections and we all just look stupid and X just remains in its own universe separate from everything. Which there is definitely a non-zero chance of because Takahashi is a troll and he might just delay it for future games or something like that, or we may never get an X connection, who knows? So why specifically do I believe Mira to be a simulation, or the world that Xenoblade X takes place in to be a simulation? Well, that's because a lot of Xenoblade X starts to make a lot more sense when you look at it through that lens. From the unanswered questions, to the massive cliffhanger at the end of the game, to the attack of the ghost in the new epilogue story. There are two situations within the game where the line, "there's just something about this planet" is used, and both are referring to unexplained phenomenon within the game. The first instance comes when the light characters are questioning how they can perfectly understand all the alien life forms despite knowing that they should be speaking different languages. Obviously, not every creature in the galaxy should be speaking perfect English or Japanese, but everyone seems to understand each other anyway. Now, what if it isn't something about the planet itself, but some kind of higher existence programming everything to work that way for some specific purpose? It becomes a lot easier to believe that everything within the simulation could speak the same language if it's all being programmed or set up to do so. It would be much harder if there was some specific goal in mind behind the simulation, if there was a lot of different languages to deal with. This part, however, pales in comparison to the end of the game. We learn throughout X that humanity is now inhabiting the body of mimiazomes, artificial life forms after their consciousness has been transferred, and their real bodies, or at least the DNA for their bodies, and what's keeping them running is the life hold core, which you are desperately trying to find throughout the game. Long story short, you do successfully find the core, but the game ends with a crazy cliffhanger where you learn the core was destroyed the entire time, and as such, no humans should be functioning right now. The entire engine around their existence just isn't there. The game, of course, ends with the "there's just something about this planet" line again, and we receive no follow-up to that for 10 years. So naturally, that begs the question, what in the world is powering the mimiazomes and humanity if the lifehold core is destroyed? Well, I only know of one object in this series that is consistently some kind of infinite energy generator myself, and it's highly likely it has some kind of involvement here. Now, exactly how the Zohar/conduit is involved, I cannot entirely tell you, but my leading theory is that it's the main thing powering the simulation of Mira. If Mira is a simulation, it also explains why the lifehold core would not matter at all and everyone can continue to exist as normal, because they are running on an entirely different and more powerful engine. If this is using the same technology as the Unus Mundus network and also being run by the Zohar using the collective unconscious, it can also explain where the souls of humanity and even the alien life forms inside the simulation are coming from, assuming the higher power running the simulation needed that for something. Now, this would have been probably the general gist of the theory before last Wednesday, but now there is also the matter of the new information we got in the most recent epilogue trailer, where we finally get more information on the ghosts. Perhaps the most important thing we learn here is that the ghosts seem to be very similar to Gnosis from Xenosaga. Now, the interesting thing about Gnosis is that they are non-physical existences of the imaginary domain and normally cannot be interacted with, and must be drawn to the real domain to be attacked with conventional weapons and defeated. If they touch a human, they can immediately turn them into salt. Gnosis themselves are mainly composed of salt also. We see throughout the series that humans can also turn into Gnosis by interacting with them, but escaping before being turned into salt. This is extremely similar to a scene we see in this epilogue trailer where we see people turning white before basically evaporating. Now, we cannot exactly know for sure if this is salt, but there is a lot of very easy to point out similarities here, especially because ghosts look a lot like Gnosis and have very similar lore. I think it is very, very likely they are referencing, or maybe just potentially are, the same thing. As Xenosaga continues, we learn the truth behind Gnosis and that they are actually humans whose souls have rejected the collective unconscious. So it makes even more sense that they seem to be drawn to and attack humanity. So if they normally only exist in the imaginary domain, then why do they seemingly have physical bodies in Xenoblade X? Well, if Mira is a simulation similar to the Encephalon in Xenosaga, then everything makes sense. The Encephalon is already using the collective unconscious and Unus Mundus network as a power source, so it essentially takes place within this imaginary domain as well. This can also explain why the Ghost or Gnosis are there to begin with, since it's basically within the same region if it's the same kind of simulation. Especially because in Xenosaga, Gnosis don't really invade the real world until much later than this. I think we're due for something big connection-wise that this is happening now, and it only adds to my theory that Xenosaga is definitely connected somehow too. So that also begs the question, for what purpose would the simulation exist? And that really goes right back to what I mentioned near the beginning about how the Trinity processor was raised in a simulation or virtual reality as a method of controlling the conduit. Mira could have been a test run for the power of running one of these simulations, or it even could have been the environment or the simulation itself that the Trinity processor was initially raised in. It could have been a test run for the Unus Mundus network and Encephalon, and it could have even been a way to learn more about Gnosis to see how to combat them or what to do about them in the future to save the universe from its inevitable death. Interestingly enough, in the real domain, Gnosis are very similar to ghosts since you can't really interact with them normally, and they're also just kind of the souls of dead humanity, so I think that's pretty interesting too, just by a naming scheme. I believe that whoever might have been running this simulation had a very specific purpose in mind that would advance an agenda that we've already seen somewhere else in the Xeno series, since X seems to take place much further in the past, and it's very likely the simulator was created much closer to our modern time than to the future of the Xenoblade world. Whether it was Wilhelm, Klaus, someone under them, or anything like that, another scientist, I believe that someone was in charge here and there's going to be some kind of major connection with that. Plus, if you want to connect it to the series in the current timeline, there's always the possibility you could say the simulator was restarted, or even that it was running the entire time, and I wouldn't be surprised if they found a way to pull people out of the simulation into artificial bodies similar to mimiazomes if they tried hard enough, just because if they are kind of the same kind of humanity's consciousness, it would make sense that they could pull them out of here as well. After all, that's exactly what they did with the Aegises, and they all had biological bodies by the end of it as well, even though they were originally raised in an artificial environment like that. All in all, I think there's a lot of potential evidence supporting this theory, which once again means I have maybe a 5 or 6% chance of this being right. And you know what? That's okay, because speculation and theory crafting is part of the fun. I could go into more detail and even talk about how Mira could be a starting point with memories ingrained, like we saw with Eleonora in the Yelv mission, where all his memories are essentially made up, and how maybe everyone on Mira could be like that, which could be a leading theory behind them being simulated existences if only the world of Mira actually exists within the simulation. But this could also be reasoning for an actual in-universe connection, with the Earth being blown up never happening, and most life forms on Mira still being an experiment in some different kind of way. Regardless, there's a lot of interesting details if you look into it, but as I don't want to keep you all day, I think this is a good enough explanation and hopefully enough to at least get you thinking about it. There's definitely more potential for connections based on what we've seen, like the new scale model looking similar to an Ouroboros, and hell, it could even be composed of parts of humanity's collective unconscious banding together to fight the Gnosis, similar to how Noah and Mio combine, and we see something similar to an annihilation event here too. There's so many potential directions this could go, and I'm really excited to see what actually happens. If you enjoyed this video, once again, be sure to like and subscribe, be sure to share with your friends, and definitely comment your own theories or tell me why I'm 100% wrong. Regardless, I hope you did get something out of this, and please look forward to all of my Xenoblade X videos in the future. Have a wonderful and blessed day, everyone, and hopefully I'll see you soon.